Hello, everyone. I'm Sheila Kumar-Hay of Ecstatic Birth, and I'm so excited to be here today with Kimberly Ann Johnson. Kimberly is an amazing, amazing woman. She's got so many different titles. First and foremost, mom, single mom, birth doula, sexological body worker, somatic experiencing trauma resolution practitioner, and she's the author of The Fourth Trimester, a postpartum guide to healing your body, balancing your emotions, and restoring your vitality. Kimberly, welcome. I'm so happy to be having this conversation with you today.
Me too. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, and so today we're going to be talking about gynecological trauma. It's a topic that I've seen Kimberly talking about lately on her, on her social media profiles and on her email list as she's promoting her Jaguar course, which is coming up. And I think it's such an important topic because I think so many of us, go into, especially expectant moms, like I know when I was first pregnant, went into my birth thinking, oh, that's not going to happen to me. Like I'm strong enough to overcome X, Y, or Z. And I did, as a first-time mom, find myself experiencing birth trauma. And so I think it's a really important conversation to open up. And Kimberly, I would love for you to just start by sharing a little bit about, like, how did you come about this work?
So when I became a mom, I had a home birth, and I guess after people read my book, a lot of the times they give my birth the label of like, oh, you had a traumatic birth, but I don't really feel like my birth itself was traumatic, although I did have a lot of things that I needed to work out, both with my midwives and with myself. But for me, it was really more about my postpartum care and just not being able to get the information that I needed and not knowing where to go to get the information. So I came out of birth with a tear that I thought was a stage 4 tear because I was having fecal incontinence and I was having like rectal stuff. So in my mind, that meant, oh, I had a tear that went all the way back because I couldn't figure out why I would have a bunch of anal problems if I didn't have that. But after a couple of years, I ran into my midwives, and when they heard me talking about what happened to me, they were like, you didn't have a stage 4 tear there. You had a 2. Barely a 2, but we stitched you with new material and your body rejected it. But to me, that just, like, I couldn't believe it was like 2.5 years before I even had the pieces that I needed to understand where I was at, let alone be able to put the pieces together, which took me another like 4 years to heal myself. So I was lucky because I've always been very leery of doctors. And I was lucky because I had always had good health, so I didn't really need them. And I had really good periods. I had a pretty regular cycle, so that was my method of birth control up until I got pregnant. And I'd never had any unwanted pregnancies. So I really was a little bit naive until I had my own experience. And until I started working with birth and with women and their pelvises, then I started hearing what women really go through, and it was a Pandora's box. So that's when I really started devoting my work in that direction.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So I was thinking, ahead of our talk about why is it that we are so susceptible to this kind of trauma, right? Why is it that we walk into the doctor's office and we might lose our voice or our sense of autonomy? And I was hoping you could speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think it's an encyclopedic topic. I'll take it from the nervous system perspective because that's the perspective that I often look from, but we can also look from a systemic perspective. But from an internal nervous system perspective, our first layer of determining safety is our social nervous system. And our social nervous system governs the nerves that govern our eyes, our ears, our sense organs, our heart, and up through our throat. So it's how we orient in our environment. And as women, we're specifically affected and impacted by the social nervous system because of estrogen. So estrogen is a bonding hormone, and it's I've also called it less eloquently the giving a fuck hormone, because it's why like women who are in menopause move to Santa Fe and are just like, y'all can make yourself dinner and like I don't care anymore, and like I'm just gonna go hang out and like do art, because your estrogen drops and you're just not so concerned about keeping the family together or pleasing or doing the things that other people want you to do. So because not only are we biologically the social nervous system evolved for primates for maternal bonding. So we're especially attuned to how other people are feeling and what they think and if we're safe because of that. So when we're in the position and we're confronting authority that's a hierarchical relationship, we oftentimes, it's called a fawning response. When our social nervous system is under threat, we befriend, or some people know that as the tendon befriend. We move closer to the threat by being polite, by being nice, because we've learned that that makes us safer. And in many cases, it does. So in many cases, it has been a survival technique. When we're children, if we're rebellious and we're difficult or all those things, a lot of times we don't get the things that we want. So we learn, especially, you know, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a school teacher, and he goes, yeah, it's like the girls are like raised to be lap dogs. And I was like, oh, that's grim. But that that we can call it an instinct, and then we can also call it a habit. So it's the double deal. Like we can't ever say, oh, it's nature or nurture. It's like, well, yeah, it starts one way, but then our culture really benefits and, well, thinks that it benefits from that acquiescence and that toleration. And so we're not as well practiced at tolerating conflict, at being okay with saying something that might offend someone else, because we're afraid we'll lose connection. And it's been mostly our job to preserve connection.
Yeah, that's really illuminating. And I'm also curious about the piece, you know, like trauma at its heart is like a fear of death, right? That's been internalized in the body. Do you agree with that definition?
I've never heard that definition before. Yeah.
So, one of the things I grapple with a lot is like, well, what lives in the body, right? When I'm supporting women and teaching practitioners to support women to enjoy the experience of birth, to flow through their birth, to open up their energetic channels, there are some patterns that we're holding on a societal level as well, right? So sexuality is when we all hold some kind of trauma in relation to our sexuality, whether that's a personal trauma or like societal level, right? In terms of seeing that it's really not safe to be a fully sexual being in our society. So I'm curious about the fear of death specifically, because I feel like there's so much fear in the birthing field. And I hear a lot from the practitioners that I work with that one of the struggles that they have is a lot of times their clients are so scared about their safety or the safety of their child that they're willing to tolerate anything. Like they just kind of like usurp all control and decision making to, you know, the medical establishment or whoever's telling them that like, if you don't do X, Y, or Z, you won't be safe. I'm curious your thoughts on that and how women can navigate that.
Again, that's like very multi-layered. So
it's a big topic.
For me, it's about, so you're exactly right. So we get in a situation where we're outsourcing our authority. And that's basically the job of a doctor in a way. Like we're hiring a doctor or a midwife to be an authority about something that we don't know about, right? We haven't seen 500 births. We don't know how births go, or the animal of our body understands birth, but and that's even like a maybe these days, because we're so domesticated that a lot of us go into the birth altar and we've never seen a birth. We've never had uninhibited sex. We've never actually experienced what free-flowing spontaneous movement might be, right? So as far as death goes, the way that I see it is, I mean, what I see is just, so, I mean, for myself, I'm like a almost 100% non-interventionist. So, you know, if I got hit by a car and I broke a bone, I would definitely go to the hospital and get my bone set. But so for myself, I claim that authority. And really I think that there's this thing that we want, instead of saying, I will take responsibility for my choices, we want to hedge our bets and say, well, I'll divide this with that person. Like, well, if my baby dies, then at least it's going to be someone else's fault. It won't be my fault. So I guess what you're saying in a way is like the fear of death doesn't actually allow you to be in the free flow of life. Because the fact of the matter is babies do die and mothers do die and pregnancies end. And much, much more of the time, women live and babies live and healthy birth happens. Well, I don't know if healthy birth, but mothers and babies generally live in the birth process. Yeah. But having that kind of holding that over someone's head and blackmailing them with that seems to be a very frequent tactic. And as a woman, and I feel this way anyway, and I don't even know if it's just being a woman, but right now we're talking about birth, but I feel like to be an autonomous individual in the overculture that we live in, most of the time we have to be sort of breaking against what the dominant narrative is. Right. So in birth, it's even more so because you're in a realm where there's an assumption that medicine itself, its primary job is only to keep you alive, right? Its primary job isn't to keep you intact.
Right.
It's not to maintain wholeness or to observe a physiological process. How many women here, if everything goes well, then yes, you can have this birth. But what goes well means to the provider is like a million things you never would have even thought to ask about.
Right.
So I think that it's, this question of how we claim our own authority and trusting our instincts, because even people who think they don't have instincts, when you talk to them about like where things started to shift, they really did know at that time, this didn't feel right for me. But then they say, but I was 32 weeks and I couldn't change providers, or, but this person would give me this and not that. And what I find is, I don't know if you think this or your practitioners do, but I just don't think there's a lot of bargaining room when it comes to birth.
What do you mean by bargaining room? Between, let's say, an expectant mother and her practitioner in terms of her desires and what they're...
I mean more with yourself.
Or with yourself.
Like this whole thing that people say, well, yeah, I'm going for a home birth in the hospital.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hospital, you're not home. You can have a humanized birth in a hospital, perhaps. But I find that women are like, well, I didn't really like this, but they had that kind of thing. Like, well, they took my insurance, but they're gonna give me an episiotomy. It's like all these, like, it feels like a bait and switch to me. Like, oh, well, I'll give you this if you give me that. I don't think that really, I haven't seen that works.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. And I think part of the problem, like just even feeling back to my own first experience, you said it, like you don't know what you don't know, right? Like you don't even know what to ask about or what to ask for until you get educated. And one of the things we see a lot is, you know, the women that are really fierce at protecting their bodies, really fierce at protecting their birth experience are the ones, unfortunately, who have had a prior bad experience, because they all of a sudden they know, oh my gosh, you know, just hoping for the best, which I did, you know, hoping for the best and thinking like you can overcome X, Y, or Z, even if you're putting in a situation where you're more prone to that. It just doesn't work. So you have to get really, really fierce. And I feel like,
I don't know what that is with, because it's the same with postpartum. Like the only people who care about postpartum are people who have shitty first postpartum experiences. No matter how much education you try to offer, I don't I think that honestly, part of it is white privilege, because if you're white, we get to maintain this kind of innocence where we think that the system will actually care for us. We think that, and I don't understand how that works, because if you talk to most Black women, they're like, I didn't think the doctor was going to take care of me. Like, when has the doctor ever given me good care before? But across the racial spectrum, there's still this idea as women where we think that somehow we project that what you wrote and is like Father, Doctor, God, there's going to be this rescuing thing. And somehow that feels it's safer to attach onto that than to be like, I better learn how to inhabit this. Like, and I love the word fierce, and it's like such a huge part of my work. Yeah. And I want people to understand that like healthy aggression and aggression are two different things. And it's very unfortunate that most women need to occupy their sympathetic nervous system to the extent they do in birth, because optimally we wouldn't be playing these dual roles. Optimally, we would be so protected, and we could just trust that, and I know on my part, it was like, until you work inside the birth world people seem kind of hysterical. It's like, why are you guys making such a bit, like, it couldn't possibly be this bad. Like, how could it be this bad? Like, look at how many millions of women there are having babies. Like, what's going on, right? But the thing is, it is this bad. And that's why we really shouldn't have to be straddling in our nervous system all the branches, because it's asking the system too much. And that's why people are exhausted and depressed, a lot of people afterwards, even when the birth goes well, because your system, we should just be in a group of other people that also have similar belief systems than we do, that smell like us, that eat like us, that, and then we've seen we've seen our nieces, or we've seen our aunts, or we've seen our grandmother's birth. And then it's like, oh, it's my turn. And so I'm going to go to the same place. And I don't have like 25 hospitals to choose from. And I don't have like 5,000 baby carriers to choose from. And I'm not even asking myself, am I breastfeeding? Of course I'm breastfeeding, because what else are we going to feed the kid around here? Like, our systems have had to adapt so fast to something that actually, that's why I love Esther Perel's, the title of her book, Mating in Captivity. It's like birthing in captivity. We're not meant to birth in captivity. Yeah. Birth doesn't usually go well in captivity, as we know from all the other mammal friends that, yeah.
Right. And so I think this is so important, because if we recognize that the system is broken, right, whether you're an expectant mom or a birth practitioner, and you're saying, all right, how do we then activate? Like, we can't just hand over our bodies, hand over and like fully surrender. We have to be fierce, right, about creating the conditions to make sure that we can protect ourselves, or our client is protected, to create the ferocity to protect the birthing space. So can you talk about that a little bit? Like, what recommendations do you have for an expectant mom? Let's start there, and then we'll move on to practitioners.
I'm going to come back to the nervous system, and I'm going to say, first of all, it's your own ability to regulate. So in my book, I have a section, cross-train your nervous system. Instead of thinking that birth preparation is only about learning steps, it's actually about preparing your body, and not like prenatal yoga because you've got to open your hips. Like, no, how are you able to relax? How are you able to feel protected? Who will protect you? Because we're not supposed to be protecting ourselves at the same time. So I would say, be fierce about the choices you make for care providers. Be fierce and use your neocortical functioning for that. Like, ask some good questions. Find the people that are in your community that are doulas and midwives. And if you want a doctor, find the doctor that those doulas and midwives like and that they work with, because then you're likely to get someone who will offer you woman-centered care. Find out the statistics at the hospital you're going to, because that's the number one determinant, no matter of your age, your gestational, how far along you are, any of that stuff. The highest determinant is where you actually give birth. So if you go to Cedars-Sinai and they have a 60% C-section rate, that means you have a 60% chance of getting a C-section, independently of who your doctor is and all that stuff. So it is really important to choose those things. And then also to choose how you use your energy when you're pregnant. It's very hard to be working up until 39 weeks and 5 days and then go into labor and shift around and be able, because what's demanded in the birth space isn't what's demanded in the workspace. So that ferocity actually comes from an ability to settle, right? The ferocity, the deep level of ferocity comes from our ability to really be in our felt sense and perceive what's going on and be able to let go of some of that neocortical functioning. But sometimes we think of that ferocity as like, I'm going to know the right thing to say and when to say it and how to argue. That ferocity has to kind of take a back seat because we've done such a good job of scaffolding ourselves. And I hear a lot of women, this is like another bargain, is like, well, I had to go to the OR and I really would have rather had my doula, but I knew that would hurt my husband's feelings. So my husband was there, but then I didn't really get what I needed. That's like a really good example of like, this is an experience that's like no other. And societal convention and what you think you're supposed to do, that will come back later on. And it might come back in your sexuality. It might come back in your pelvic health, but it's not very forgiving, the birth space.
And I find it's the biggest training for motherhood, right? Because as a mom, being really fierce, protecting your newborn, protecting your infant, your toddler, the little one that can't advocate for themselves, like, are you going to hand it over to like what society expects of you? Or are you going to show up for your kid in a way that, you know what, you might piss off your mother or your mother-in-law or your doctor, but to really be able to stand for your kid. So I find that like this conversation in training for birth, of being able to really connect to your body, to your instincts, to really honor what's true for you, it carries over so many gifts into motherhood too.
Definitely. And to relationship and to just evolution.
Yeah. I want to circle back to the practitioners now. You know, a lot of doulas especially will say, you know, I know what the mom wanted. We talked about it, and then the birth came, and she just handed over everything and wouldn't allow me to support her the way I wanted. Or even ahead of birth, you know, a lot of doulas will say, oh, you know, we had all this planned, but then her doctor scared her, and so now she's going in for an induction, or she's going in for, you know. So what advice do you have for practitioners who are trying to support their clients to activate that ferocity?
It's a tough one. It's a really tough one because it's not so predictable. I think it has a lot to do with how you set up your prenatals. And I think it's really okay for doulas to have criteria. You know, at a certain point, I stopped doing hospital births. I was trained as a doula to believe that my job was to be like, to show unconditional regard and to be neutral. And what I found for myself is like, that doesn't work as a role for me. I had many births where I was telling myself, okay, well, it was better than it would have been if I wasn't there, but it still felt very traumatic to me. And so I think we have to know ourselves, and we have to know, like, what is it? It's okay to say, I work with these doctors. You know, if someone says, well, I like to hire you and I work with this doctor, you don't have to say, I don't like that doctor. You just hand them a list of like, these are the doctors that I work with. Yeah. It's like speaks for itself, right? Here are the practitioners that I feel comfortable working with. Because you can't fight against the care providers and the hospital. And it's not our job as doulas to do that. In fact, we're supposed to help to create a harmonious birth space so that someone won't get bad treatment. Yeah. And then, yeah, I mean, my whole Jaguar course is basically about that. It's about how you, what are the phases of regulating your system? How do you know what phase you're in? And I feel that that is really important language to have in common with someone, so that you know where they are and that you're able to verbally affirm that with them. Because some people who look like they're super relaxed are actually just in a freeze state. They cannot, they look super calm and mellow, but they're actually freaking out. Some people are just highly expressive, but actually once they're talking about stuff, they're fine. So it really helps them to know what's going on. And so instead of making a decision from that fear place, they can recognize, oh yeah, I'm in this high state of alarm. And that's what's creating this situation.
I want to highlight something that you said, which is that, you as a doula had to take responsibility for your experience. I think it's actually the same conversation with moms and with, doulas and other practitioners that might not be the, the ultimate authority in that, like, we have this culture of like self-abdication of like, okay, I'm gonna sacrifice myself for the good of my baby, or I'm gonna sacrifice myself for the good of my client. And actually that doesn't serve anyone, right? So being really fierce about like what works for you as a practitioner, which is what I heard you say, and really having clear boundaries and parameters under which you work with your clients is, taking care of yourself is really the best thing you can do to take care of your clients. Just like as a mom, taking care of yourself is the best thing you can do to take care of your kid. So,
right? So we're modeling it not just in our words, but that's part of it. We're modeling, this is what works, this is not what works, and understanding, because boundaries, sometimes people have a hard time with them because they feel like they're not nice, right? So some people, setting a boundary feels aggressive, or having a boundary set to them feels aggressive. Like I just set a boundary the other day and someone told me I was attacking them. And I was like, I'm just talking to you completely normally. I'm just telling you that this isn't okay with me. So it's important for people to feel what that is, that you can maintain contact and still have boundaries, that no one's gonna punish you for it or retaliate against you. But this is just like, here's the rules of the game.
Love it. And I love the work that you're doing. So I was hoping you could just share with everyone about your Jaguar course and why do you call it your Jaguar course?
Oh, well, that's a good story. A long story, so I'll see if I can hit the high notes. Well, so I lived in Brazil for 8 years. My daughter's Brazilian, and I gave birth in Brazil. And afterwards, I'm a single mom. I've been a single mom since my daughter was 9 months old. And I had an experience where I was at some friend's house, and there were about 4 adults, and she was the only child. And everybody was saying they wanted to eat. What do they want to eat? And everyone was saying, I can't remember, but I think it was like everybody wanted pizza, I'm pretty sure. And she wanted sushi. And she kind of insisted, and everybody gave in. And I like saw what was going on, but I also was kind of relying on the other adults to be like, you're a kid, we're going to pizza. But they were like deflecting to me kind of. And afterwards, my friend pulled me aside and said, you're raising a really authoritarian child and you need to figure this out, which registered to me. Like I was super mad at her for saying it, and I was upset. But then I started thinking about it more, and I really trusted this friend. So I thought, okay, she's probably right, even though I can't see it because I trust her observations. And so I was in somatic experiencing therapy and school at the time. So I was in the training. This was like in 2011. And I went to my therapist, who was a man. It was the first time I had gone to a male therapist since high school. When I had gone once, and then I was creeped out, and then later the guy was found guilty for inappropriate relationships with clients. So I realized I had always had women therapists, and I chose a male therapist that was I was sexually assaulted in college, and so I chose a therapist that had a physicality like the person who assaulted me. And I went to him and I told him this, and he said, I was feeling really sorry for myself. And I was like, I'm the mom and the dad, and I have to set all the limits and have all this unconditional love. And it just is so hard to do both things. And he just looked at me and he said, "Você é muito onça." That means you're a jaguar. And I just kind of looked at him and he said, "Eu sou da Amazônia. I'm from the Amazon. Did you know that?" And I was like, "No." And he told me where he was from, and he said, like, você é dourada e você é pintada. You're golden and you're spotted. And it's the mother jaguars that teach their cubs to hunt. The fathers are not doing it. And so it's your job to do this. And he said, go and watch videos of jaguars and their cubs and see what the mothers are doing and copy them. So I did. I went home and I watched videos of jaguars and their cubs. And what they're doing looks a lot like what the African women are doing in the Bébé movie, where the babies are like crawling in the dirt and the moms are kind of like pushing them off them, and they're kind of laughing, and then they're crawling up and nursing, and then they're going back down. And so I started wrestling more with my daughter and physically dominating her. So I would like pin her, and then I would let her fight me back, and then I would lay on top of her. And I noticed that she really liked it, and she really liked to be, she would like to fight back as well, but she liked that feeling of containment. And so I used the lessons of that to teach me how to parent her in a way where I had right authority and where I was in charge. And she felt that from me, that she was, before I guess I was doing a lot, I was putting my head forward and bulging my eyes out when I was trying to make a point with her. And he noticed that as how I was, showing him how I was trying to assert. And so we just worked on coordinating my body language and how I was communicating with everything, with my eyes, with my tone, with my content. And from there, my work took a big jump. So I had that process, and that's really where the jaguar thing. And I lived in Rio, so we have Carnival just finished. And every year at Carnival, the pictures come across my feed, and I'm always a jaguar. So Cece would be like, "Are you going to be a jaguar again?" And I was like, "Yep." So every year I would dress as the jaguar at Carnival, and everyone knew me everywhere because I'm like the redheaded jaguar. And it was a big lesson because I had in Carnival, it's like a free for all. So there's people everywhere. You're scrunched. You could get trampled. People are trying to kiss you with their mouth open. I mean, there's like everything's happening. And so I really had to have my wits about me, and people are like kind of flirting, but it's like all about like the witty banter, which is harder in another language too. So just like learning how to articulate like this, people would be like, "Ai, oncinha, eu quero te arranhar todinha. I want to like scratch you all over," or whatever. And then when I came to the States and I started specifically working with birth trauma and sexual trauma, when I would tell people like, "Okay, let's play the predator and the prey, like I'll be the wolf and you be the rabbit," I would tell them, "Why don't you be the wolf and I'll be the rabbit?" Because they had always been the rabbit. And they would go into a freeze or a rabbit position, even at the thought of becoming the wolf or becoming the jaguar. Mm-hmm. So I realized that women actually a lot of women don't know how to do that. And we've been perpetrated, and we have many of us, and we have so many experiences of not wanting to be the perpetrator, that we are terrified to even activate those instincts, which are really self-protective instincts at the end of the day. So, why do you hunt? You hunt to get food so that you can survive, so that you can feed your cubs. So we need to have those self-protective mechanisms in place. And then the great thing is, once you have those, you actually don't need to use them that much. So women are afraid of becoming like alpha women or hyper aggressive. That's all overcompensation. That's not actual ferocity. That's acting it out. The actual ferocity is just like, I know if there's someone behind me that I would be able to defend myself, and I would have full capacity. And my observation is that when women do restore these predator, like we're able to stop, we're able to get on all fours and feel the power in the back, we can hold attention, that then we don't find ourselves so much in those prey positions.
Fascinating. I have a billion more questions to ask you, but we're going to hold off. Tell everyone about your Jaguar course, when it starts, any details they need to know, and I'll also put a link for it beneath this video.
Yeah, It starts on Tuesday. It's maggamama.com/jaguar for anyone interested. The name has nothing to do with the current political leadership. Magga means sorceress in Portuguese. And it's what my neighbors called me. I feel like when I'm explaining like Magga or jaguar, it's because now like spirit animals are all the rage and all this. Like, actually, when my therapist said that to me, I was like, that's just so weird. And the only reason I could accept it was because he was from the Amazon, and which I didn't even know. And then it's taken on so many multiple meanings and so many directions. So the class is basically the foundation of somatic experiencing school, like what I learned from it, the mixture of, in somatic experiencing training, you don't really learn much about sexuality. So you don't learn that gender has much to do with any of this. So I'm really interested in the power dynamics, and that's exactly what we're talking about. Like, how do you hold your own power within a power dynamic? And it's about, yes, there's information and material, but we also do a lot of somatic work. So the things that I'm talking about like in the course, we mobilize. So like a rabbit is like this, right? Like the rabbit's got like that little fast twitch, but a growl is something totally different. So being able to mobilize sound, to be able to bare your teeth, your canines, or in this case, I guess your felines, your incisors, the things that an animal would do in order to protect itself. So yeah, we start next week. There's been like thousands of women that have gone through the course now. I started it after when Me Too just started. It's kind of interesting with sex. And we talk about even attachment, because attachment has a lot to do with this too. It has so much to do with not only the social nervous system, but also how we choose care providers, right? We're choosing somebody that might be familiar, but not necessarily the thing that is the best for us.
Fascinating, fascinating. I encourage everyone to check out Kimberly's Jaguar course. And I also am celebrating that Kimberly is coming on as a guest teacher in this coming year's Ecstatic Birth Practitioner training. So for those of you interested in that, a little tease from today's interview. Kimberly, thank you so much for doing the work that you do. It is so important. It is so powerful. And thank you for coming here today to have this conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So fun. All right. Lots of love, everyone. Thank you for watching. And if anyone has any questions or any comments, just put it right underneath the video and I'll update with any links that we talked about today. All right, lots of love.